Well, hi, everyone. The reason I wanted to cover this story today is it's interesting to me how media covers things that involve technical or mathematical issues, and particularly where it requires any degree of critical thinking. And unfortunately, what we see time and again with our mass media in this country is that critical thinking seems to be in short supply, at least in terms of at least asking important and meaningful questions instead of just taking a high level sensationalistic approach to these stories. So I'm going to play this segment here and I'm going to come back to it.
Turning our attention now to a story that we are following closely, and it's making national headlines right now. The Trump administration has directed federal agencies to investigate whether a series of deaths and disappearances among scientists with high-level security clearances are linked. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed the probe following reports that 11 individuals tied to sensitive military, nuclear, and aerospace research have been affected.
This has been widely reported. I'm recording this video on Friday, April 24th, 2026. Earlier this week, the White House announced that they were going to have the FBI head up an investigation into looking at any potential correlation among these incidences of disappearances or deaths. And okay, I guess if there's enough concern or public outcry, some degree of investigation I think is warranted. But what struck me is the tenuous nature of this alleged conspiracy, if you will, the apparent relationship that really is no relationship among these people, except for essentially very superficial things if you start looking at it in any level of detail. And this story's been widely reported. I've got references here to Fox News, CNN. It's been widely reported across all the media outlets here this week. And we see this CNN headline: at least 10 people tied to sensitive U.S. research have died or disappeared in recent years. So that's one thing I'll note here. This is over a 3.5-year span. And the CNN article starts out with a nuclear physicist and MIT professor fatally shot outside his Massachusetts residence, a retired Air Force general missing from his New Mexico home, and so on. Well, the first person they're leading off with, it's been pretty well established that there was no conspiracy involved with his tragic death, and I'm going to come back to this. The FBI now says it's spearheading the effort to look for connections into the missing and deceased scientists, adding that it's working with the Department of Energy, Department of War, and with our state and local law enforcement partners to find answers. Well, again, apparently the so-called relationship here is that these were people working in highly technical fields. Most of them were either aerospace engineers or nuclear scientists. You're looking at a total population of those career fields in the U.S. of about 100,000 individuals. And that number is significant in one way that I'll come back to from a statistical standpoint. And this article goes on to quote, the Republican-led House Oversight Committee announced Monday it will investigate reports of deaths and disappearance of individuals whom it said had access to sensitive scientific information. The reports raised questions about a possible sinister connection between the deaths and disappearances, the committee said in its statement, seeking briefings on the matter from the FBI, the Defense Department, the Department of Energy, and NASA. Well, I mean, there's a huge range of job disciplines here. And again, it seems that the only common denominator is that these people were involved in technical fields and in most cases required special access clearance. But let's go back to this MIT professor who was first mentioned in that CNN article. Nuno Loureiro, he was shot on December 16th, 2025, 2 days after 2 STEM students were killed at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. Tragic deaths. And it's been widely established by the FBI and other investigators that it was a lone shooter. This individual here by the name of Claudio Neves Valente, who police have named as the sole perpetrator. He is deceased at his own hand, but they recovered recordings of him confessing to these crimes, but there appears to have been a long history of mental instability as well as some type of grudge against Brown University and a fellow Portuguese national, this MIT professor, that caused this Valente to pursue some type of vendetta. Again, this doesn't in any way suggest some overarching conspiracy or any relationship to these other individuals. In fact, you'll notice that CNN article mentions this MIT professor, but they don't mention the Brown University students because it doesn't fit the narrative that they're trying to put out there. The false narrative, in my opinion, I might add. Now, if you look at this distribution of these missing and deceased individuals, they cluster where there are significant numbers of aerospace and nuclear industry jobs. It's not surprising. And if you look at a map of just, say, aerospace engineers, you'll have to ignore the white areas because apparently there was no reporting data from those states. You see a high concentration of aerospace engineers in the Southwest, these other darker red states, which rather well aligns with the distribution of these jobs. I mean, you've got Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. You have Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. And if you just look at these 11 individuals that are identified in these news stories, they have a variety of jobs. I mean, we already talked about the MIT professor. This individual, Stephen Garcia, was reportedly a property custodian. Then you have a number of people who were no longer active in their career because they had retired, such as the case of William McCasland. And you have several deaths where the police reported there was no foul play involved, although in some of the instances, the cause of death was not released, and that's not uncommon. Sometimes family members don't want to divulge diseases or self-harm situations. But again, this is a wide distribution over 3.5 years of deaths and disappearances. And if you take a population of just say 100,000 people, like I mentioned, if you combine aerospace and nuclear engineer populations in the United States, it's about 100,000 people. So if you take a population of working age adults, aged 25 to say 65, in any given year, 330 of them will die. That's just how it works statistically per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So to essentially cherry pick and associate these individuals as having some commonality that has led to their disappearance or death is just completely irresponsible, in my opinion. Now, again, because of alleged national security interest, I think it could be justified to do an investigation, but I would think they could make short work of any such investigation. But to me, it's just a microcosm of how anything that is even somewhat technically oriented is just poorly reported in this country. So some of you may be all over this story and think that there really is something linking these individuals. I don't think so based on the available information. But in my mind, any suspected conspiracies or alleged conspiracies should have a high burden of proof. And unfortunately, especially now with the internet and just the state of our national media in this country, conspiracies seem to have a very low bar for evidence. So I'll continue to follow the story and do any updates to the extent that they're warranted. With that, I'd like to send a shout out to those of you who've contributed to Buy Me a Coffee. That's one of the better ways to support this channel. I also want to thank the channel members and those of you who've contributed to Super Thanks, additional great ways to support the channel. So stay tuned for future videos, everyone.